The worst NFL draft bust from every single school that had one, starting with Illinois and Jeff George. After transferring to Illinois in 1988, George displayed one of the strongest arms scouts had ever seen. He broke out in '89 with 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 11 picks. Not amazing stats, but the physical talent was enough to make him the #1 overall pick in the 1990 draft, ahead of future Hall of Famers Cortez Kennedy and Junior Seau. The Colts traded a monster haul that included a Pro Bowl tackle, Andre Rison, and a future first-rounder to move up and take him. So George was expected to lead the franchise, but he ended up doing nothing other than racking up empty production. He started 124 games, threw for over 27,000 yards, 154 TDs, and 113 picks, and even had big seasons like 4,100 yards and 24 touchdowns in 1994 and 29 TDs in '97. If Jeff George were a second-round pick, he's just another guy with a long career. But as a #1 overall pick, he gets the nod for Illinois. Indiana, Kevin Allen. The Eagles made Kevin Allen the 9th overall pick in the '85 draft, 7 picks ahead of Jerry Rice, expecting a cornerstone on the offensive line. But Allen's very first game came against the Giants, where the Eagles allowed 8 sacks, setting the tone for a brutal rookie season. By mid-season, the top 10 pick had already been benched and reassigned to special teams. In 1986, head coach Buddy Ryan didn't hold back, saying that if you want someone to stand around and kill the grass, Kevin Allen can do it. After a poor rookie year, he tested positive for snow in 1986 and was cut early in the season. Days later, he was charged with a serious crime against a woman, and his football career was over before time in NFL Europe and the Arena League in the '90s. Iowa, Robert Gallery. Huge, polished, and technically sound, Robert Gallery was widely viewed as a can't-miss tackle prospect coming out of Iowa. So much so that the Raiders made him the #2 overall pick in '04, directly in front of Larry Fitzgerald, Phillip Rivers, and Sean Taylor. But Gallery struggled mightily on the blind side, and it became clear he was not going to live up to the billing of a top 2 pick. Eventually, Oakland moved him inside to guard, where he became passable. He lasted 8 seasons in the league, starting 103 games, so that's a respectable career. But you don't take a guard, let alone a converted one, 2nd overall. Maryland, Darius Hayward-Bay. Darius Hayward-Bay was one of the most electrifying athletes in the country. His speed was his calling card, and when he ran a blazing 4.3 40-yard dash, he captured the heart of the speed-obsessed Al Davis, who fell in love with the upside and selected him 7th overall to the Raiders in 2009, ahead of Michael Crabtree and Percy Harvin. But across 4 seasons in Oakland, unrefined route running and drops limited him to just 140 catches for 2,071 yards and 11 touchdowns. No good. To his credit, he carved out a longer career as a role player with the Steelers, but complimentary piece isn't enough for 7th overall. Michigan, David Terrell. David Terrell was the next great receiver to come out of Ann Arbor. In his sophomore season, he went for 150 yards and 3 TDs against Alabama in the Orange Bowl, catching passes from Tom Brady himself. In an even bigger junior year, he totaled nearly 1,000 yards and 13 scores. With size, athleticism, and big game production, Terrell entered the draft with serious hype that garnered the 8th overall selection by the Bears in 2001. And in his rookie year, he had 34 catches for 415 yards and 4 touchdowns. But his best season came 3 years later in 2004, with 42 catches for 700 yards. But that was the last time he would ever catch a ball in the NFL. He ended his career with 1,600 career yards. Michigan State. Tony Mandrich, Charles Rogers, and Demetrius Underwood. For Spartans football, the biggest draft bust is a 3-way tie between some of the worst misses in league history. Start with Tony Mandrich, the most well-known of the group. Taken 2nd overall in 1989 by the Packers, Mandrich was the most hyped offensive line prospect of all time. But he became an equally massive bust, especially given the horrifying fact that Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, and Deion Sanders were taken with the next 3 picks. Then there's wide receiver Charles Rogers, who might have been the most naturally talented of the 3. Drafted 1 pick ahead of Andre Johnson, 2nd overall in 2003 by the Lions, Rogers dominated at Michigan State with 2,500 yards and 25 touchdowns in just 2 seasons, winning the Biletnikoff Award. But multiple broken collarbones and substance abuse issues ruined his career. which ended with just 36 catches for 440 yards. He unfortunately passed away at 38 due to liver failure. But Demetrius Underwood was the most bizarre case of all. Taken in the first round in 1999, he left the Vikings on day one of training camp because of religious reasons and never played a game for Minnesota. 1 month later, the Dolphins took a flyer, but Underwood was found wandering the streets after injuring himself and speaking erratically, leading to his detainment. He resurfaced with the Cowboys in 2000, but multiple incidents, like intentionally walking into traffic once again, ultimately ended his career. The University of Minnesota did not have a notable draft bust. Nebraska, Lawrence Phillips. Lawrence Phillips had the makings of the next all-time great NFL back. He was the centerpiece of Nebraska's powerhouse offenses, fueling multiple national championship runs with a rare blend of power, burst, and big playability. On pure talent, he had Hall of Fame potential. But the red flags were already there. Despite well-documented off-field concerns, the Rams still took Phillips number 6 overall in the '96 draft, shipping Jerome Bettis out of town to make room for him. It didn't take long for that gamble to backfire. Phillips showed flashes as a rookie, running for 632 yards, but excessive drinking and partying took over to the point that he had to be effectively babysat. By year number 2, he was already out of St. Louis, bouncing to the Dolphins and later the 49ers, where he missed the block that resulted in Steve Young's career-ending concussion. In the NFL, he totaled just over 1,400 rushing yards, and things escalated very quickly. Phillips was sentenced to prison in the 2000s, and in 2015, while incarcerated, he was responsible for the death of his cellmate, and he died the following year. Northwestern, nobody. Ohio State, Art Schlichter. At Ohio State, Schlichter finished top 6 in Heisman voting 3 years straight, showcasing production and leadership that had scouts convinced he could become a franchise QB. And the Colts agreed, taking him 4th overall in 1982. Schlichter lost his job as a rookie to a 4th-round pick, a massive problem for a top 5 selection as it was, but the real issue was that even before entering the league, he had accumulated massive gambling debts and reportedly burned through his entire $350,000 signing bonus. The NFL eventually suspended him for over a year for gambling violations, but the issue didn't end there. He was cut in 1985, but his gambling continued to follow him long after his playing days, and he's been in and out of prison for decades. Oregon, Akili Smith. Smith had a meteoric ascension at Oregon. After barely seeing the field early in his career, he blew up in 1998, throwing for 3,800 yards and 30 touchdowns, turning himself into one of the most intriguing prospects in the country. So the Bengals made him the 3rd overall pick in the '99 draft, over Edgerrin James, Ricky Williams, Torrey Holt, and Champ Bailey. Even worse, they rejected a 9-pick package from the Saints that included 3 first-rounders and 2 second-rounders to do it. If you think NFL teams are stupid now, my God. As you can imagine, it didn't take long for that to look comically bad. Smith threw 2 touchdowns to 6 picks as a rookie, and across 4 seasons he made just 17 starts, finishing his career with 5 touchdown passes and 13 picks. Penn State, Ki-Jana Carter and Courtney Brown. For the Nittany Lions, the biggest bust is a tie between 2 number 1 picks. We'll start with Ki-Jana Carter, who had a dominant college career. Following a Heisman runner-up in '94, the Bengals took him 1st overall in '95. But his NFL career was doomed instantly when he tore his ACL in his very first preseason game. He never regained his elite form, finishing with 1,100 career rushing yards. Then there's Courtney Brown, another number 1 overall pick by the Browns in 2000. Brown had all the tools to be a Pro Bowl at the end, but like Carter, he could never stay healthy long enough to become the dominant pass rusher he was drafted to be, logging 19 sacks in 6 seasons. This video is sponsored by Raycon. With Mother's Day coming up, I've been thinking about gifts that people will actually use. And my mom is always on the move. Whether she's walking, running errands, or staying active, she hates feeling disconnected. And that's why Raycon's bone conduction headphones are such a perfect gift. They sit outside your ears and send vibrations through your bones, so you can listen to music, podcasts, or calls while still being able to hear everything around you. It's the best of both worlds, especially when you're on the go. I myself have been using these at the beach and at the gym, and I like that I can stay aware of my surroundings without sacrificing sound quality. They've become part of my daily routine, and they're built for all-day use as well. 13 hours of battery life, waterproof, dustproof, and they don't slip around like 99% of earbuds. But the best part of all is, of course, the premium quality without the premium price tag. Over 3 million people already love Raycon, and they come with a 30-day happiness guarantee. I know my mom would use these all the time at home or out and about, so celebrate the moms in your life by going to buyraycon.com/beachkidbc to get 15% off the bone conduction headphones. Purdue, Mike Phipps. A Boilermaker superstar, Mike Phipps led Purdue to a Rose Bowl appearance and finished second in Heisman voting in 1969. The Browns wanted their future quarterback so badly that they traded star receiver Paul Warfield to move up and select Phipps third overall in 1970. He spent years trying to live up to that price tag, but in his 12-year career with the Browns and Bears, he threw 55 touchdowns to 108 interceptions. Rutgers is nobody. UCLA, Josh Rosen. Rosen arrived at UCLA as a 5-star recruit dubbed Chosen Rosen. As a freshman, he flashed number 1 overall pick potential, throwing for 3,700 yards and 23 touchdowns. But his junior season looked nearly identical, with 3,800 yards and 26 touchdowns, raising questions about his ceiling. Rosen still went 10th overall in 2018 to the Cardinals, in one of the most loaded QB classes of all time. He went behind Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Josh Allen, with Lamar Jackson still to come later. As a rookie, Rosen went 3-10 as a starter, throwing 11 touchdowns to 14 picks with a 55% completion rate. Arizona drafted Kyler the very next year and traded Rosen after 1 season. Short stints with the Dolphins and Falcons followed, but he was finished with the NFL after the 2022 season. USC, Matt Leinart. As a Trojan, Leinart won the 2004 Heisman Trophy, led USC to multiple national titles, and operated one of the greatest offenses in NCAA history. Just like Josh Rosen, the Cardinals took him 10th overall in 2006. But poor performance and injuries stopped him from locking down the starting job. He eventually lost out to Kurt Warner in 2007 and was released in 2010. He threw just 15 touchdowns to 21 picks in his entire career. Washington, Steve Entman and Jake Locker. For Huskies football, the biggest draft bust comes down to 2 very different stories. Steve Entman was as disruptive as any player in college football. A national champion and number 1 overall pick in '92 by the Colts, he was set to anchor their defense for years. But he blew out his left knee in his rookie year and was never the same player. Sophomore season, he ruptured his right patella tendon, and in year number 3, he ruptured a disc in his neck and was out of the league at 27. 19 years later, Jake Locker was taken 8th overall in 2011 by the Titans. Locker had excellent athleticism and toughness, but accuracy issues that showed up in college followed him to the NFL. He failed to develop as a passer, battled injuries, and retired early after 4 seasons. Wisconsin, Ron Dayne. Ron Dayne was a historic Wisconsin Badger. He won the Heisman Trophy and finished his career as college football's all-time leading rusher, powering the Wisconsin offense with a bruising downhill style tailor-made for the NFL, leading the Giants to select him 11th overall in the 2000 NFL Draft, 8 picks ahead of Alabama back and future league MVP Shaun Alexander. But in kind of a Leonard Fournette way, his power-dependent style didn't overpower NFL defenders the way it did in college. Add in conditioning issues, and in 4 seasons with the Giants, he only averaged 500 yards a year on the ground. He later found modest success with the Broncos and Texans, posting a 700-yard season in '07, but that was his final season in the NFL. Boston College, Mike Mamula. At BC, Mamula was a productive edge rusher, but it was what he did after college that changed everything. He was one of the first players ever to train specifically for the combine drills. Therefore, he famously crushed the pre-draft process, putting up elite testing numbers that skyrocketed his stock. And the Eagles were all in, trading up to take him 7th overall in '95. Unfortunately, the picks they traded to Tampa ultimately netted the Bucs Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. Mamula, on the other hand, had a solid career, recording 31.5 sacks over 5 seasons, but certainly nothing compared to the great Warren Sapp. California, Rich Campbell. The Cal QB finished 3rd in Heisman voting in 1980, and in 1981, the Packers took him 6th overall, 2 picks ahead of Ronnie Lott. But in the NFL, his weak arm held him back, and he was never confident running an offense. He never started a single game in his entire career and took his last snap in 1984. Clemson, Clelin Ferrell. At Clemson, Clelin Ferrell was a key piece of a defense that won 2 national titles, and he finished his college career with 27 sacks and a reputation as one of the more interesting edge defenders in the 2019 draft. But surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, John Gruden and Mike Mayock reached to select him 4th overall in 2019, when he was projected to be a late first rounder, making it quite the bold call. Unfortunately, Ferrell logged only 10 sacks over 4 seasons with the Raiders and has spent time on 4 different teams. Duke, Mike Junkin. The fittingly named Junkin was an instinctive tackling machine linebacker for the Blue Devils, whose play style was compared to a mad dog in a meat market. That mentality caught the attention of the Browns, who traded up to select him number 5 overall in 1987. But Junkin had trouble keeping up with the speed and physical demands necessary to combat pro offenses. After 2 seasons in Cleveland, he was traded to the Chiefs and would ultimately retire after remaining unsigned through the 1990 season. Florida State, Christian Ponder. Under Jimbo Fisher, Ponder put together strong junior and senior seasons, showing accuracy, intelligence, and leadership. Traits that were nowhere to be found in the NFL, but convinced the Vikings to select him number 12 overall in the QB bust-infested 2011 draft, when he was projected as a fringe first rounder. And his rookie season was rough, throwing 13 touchdowns and 13 picks, while the Vikings went 2-8 in his starts. There were moments of improvement in 2012 while Adrian Peterson was running for 2,000 yards, but over the next 2 years, the Vikings went 2-7-1 in his starts, and Ponder lost his grip on the job. After Minnesota, the first rounder never started another NFL game. Georgia Tech, nobody. Louisville, Amobi Okoye. One of the most unique prospects the NFL has ever seen, a Nigerian defensive lineman who was both an athletic and academic prodigy. He became the youngest player ever drafted at 19 years old. That upside was too tantalizing to pass up, at least for the Texans, who selected him 10th overall in 2007, right ahead of Patrick Willis, Marshawn Lynch, and Darrelle Revis. Okoye notched 5.5 sacks as a rookie, but that would be his career high. He plateaued over the next few seasons, played 2 years with the Bears, and was out of the league after 2012. Miami, Steve Walsh. Steve Walsh was a winner at the U. He led Miami to an undefeated national championship in '87, followed it up as a consensus All-American in '88, and threw 48 touchdowns in 2 seasons. Instead of entering the traditional draft, Walsh followed his college coach Jimmy Johnson to the Cowboys and was taken in the 1989 supplemental draft, costing Dallas a first-round pick in 1990, which turned into the first overall pick that could have netted Junior Seau or Cortez Kennedy. He even started games as a rookie, briefly playing ahead of Troy Aikman, but Aikman would of course take over, and Walsh was then traded to the Saints for a package that included another first-round pick, making him ironically one of the most expensive quarterbacks ever in terms of draft capital. Over 11 years, Walsh started 38 games, throwing 40 touchdowns to 50 interceptions. NC State, Corn Robinson. Corn Robinson starred as a wideout at NC State before the Seahawks took him 9th overall in '01, one pick after Michigan bust David Terrell. Robinson showed real promise as a rookie and then broke out in year 2, catching 78 passes for 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns. Seattle had found their number 1 receiver, until multiple violations of the league's substance abuse policy, suspensions, and missed team obligations took over. Despite the obvious talent, the Seahawks released him in '05. Robinson would play for the Vikings, Packers, and even briefly return to Seattle, but he never matched the heights of his 2002. North Carolina, Mitch Trubisky. Trubisky only started 1 full season as a Tar Heel, but in that year he threw for 3,700 yards and 30 TDs. The Bears traded up to take him 2nd overall in 2017, passing on quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, a decision that would haunt them for years. Trubisky had a 12-4 season in 2018 and a Pro Bowl nod, but accuracy issues, bad decision-making, and an inability to elevate the offense kept him from solidifying himself as a starter. After 4 seasons in the Windy City, the Bears moved on. Trubisky has transitioned into a backup role with the Bills and Steelers. Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett. Pickett authored one of the greatest seasons in Pitt history. In 2021, he threw for 4,300 yards and 42 TDs, finishing as a Heisman finalist and leading Pitt to an ACC title. After that breakout, he was viewed as the top guy in a very weak QB class despite his tiny hands. The Steelers took him 20th overall in 2022 to fill the shoes of Ben Roethlisberger. But with the Steelers, he failed to generate explosive plays and generally disgusted the fan base, finishing with 13 TD passes in his first 2 seasons. He's now bouncing all over the league as a backup. SMU is no one. Stanford, Solomon Thomas. Thomas broke out at Stanford in 2016 with 8 sacks and a dominant performance in the Sun Bowl, showcasing the kind of explosiveness that made him one of the most sought-after defensive prospects in the country. The 49ers were sold, selecting him 3rd overall in 2017, ahead of guys like Jamal Adams and CMC. But Thomas logged only 6 sacks over his first 4 seasons in San Francisco as merely a rotational pass rusher. To his credit, he's managed to carve out a longer NFL career than almost anyone on this list, entering his 10th season with the Titans. Syracuse, Ted Gregory. Gregory was a consensus All-American in 1987 on the interior D-line, and the Broncos took him in the first round in 1988. But when Gregory arrived, despite being listed at 6'1", Coach Dan Reeves was shocked to learn that he was 5'9" in person. More importantly, a college knee injury became a major issue. It gave out in training camp, and the Broncos traded him to the Saints before he ever played a snap. Gregory played just 3 games for New Orleans before blowing out his knee again, ending his NFL career. Post-NFL, failed business ventures forced him into a career as a construction worker, which was also ended by a back injury. Virginia, John Harris. John Harris was a pass rusher at Virginia with the size and athletic profile that led the Eagles to select him 25th overall in '97, 3 picks ahead of future All-Pro D lineman Trevor Pryce. But in 2 seasons in Philly, Harris totaled only 2 sacks and never played another regular season down in the NFL. Virginia Tech, Jim Druckenmiller. This is one of those classic looks the part, doesn't play the part QB stories. At Virginia Tech, Druckenmiller had drool-worthy traits: 6'5", big arm, strong build, and solid production in a pro-style offense. So the 49ers thought he could be the man to take the torch from Steve Young, selecting him 26th overall in 1997. But with a name like Druckenmiller, San Francisco should have known it wasn't going to work out. In his rookie season, he showed a low football IQ, simply unable to grasp the West Coast offense or read defenses, while only completing 40% of his passes in limited action. And that was basically it. He made 1 career start and was out of the league within a few seasons. Wake Forest, Aaron Curry. Coming out of Wake Forest, Curry was seen as the safest player in the entire 2009 draft. A linebacker with elite instincts, tackling ability, and no real red flags. The Seahawks took him 4th overall, but he struggled in coverage, didn't make splash plays, and never developed into the defensive centerpiece you need from a top 5 pick. By his 3rd season, Seattle traded him to Oakland, where he stuck around for a couple of years. Arizona, Chris Singleton. As a Wildcat, Singleton was a 2-time All-Conference selection, and he capped his career with a great senior season where he showcased elite sideline-to-sideline ability. His 6'2", 250-pound frame was icing on the cake, so the Pats took him 8th overall in 1990, 9 picks ahead of Emmitt Smith. But over 4 years in New England, he never started more than 11 games in a season and was released in '93. He found a better role with the Dolphins, even starting 15 games in '95, but certainly never lived up to the hype. Arizona State, J.D. Hill. J.D. Hill was one of the best receivers in the country in 1970. So in 1971, the Bills took the speedster 4th overall, 2 picks ahead of Hall of Fame running back John Riggins. But in 7 seasons, Hill finished with under 3,000 receiving yards, and to mask physical pain during his career, became addicted to pain-killing narcotics due to being overprescribed. Baylor, RG3. RG3 won the Heisman at Baylor in 2011, throwing for 4,300 yards and 37 touchdowns, while being one of the most exciting dual-threat college QBs to ever live. The Redskins traded a haul of picks to move up and select him number 2 overall in 2012, and RG3 took the league by storm as a rookie, throwing for 3,200 yards and 20 touchdowns, while adding 815 rushing yards and winning Offensive Rookie of the Year en route to a playoff berth. but a knee injury late in the regular season led to a torn ACL against Seattle in the playoffs. Over the next few years, poor play, injuries, and tension with the organization caused the Redskins to turn the page to Kirk Cousins for good in 2015. RG3 was not a total failure. He reached a level many QBs never do, but oh how quickly it fell apart for reasons that were not necessarily his fault. BYU, Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson came out of nowhere to morph into one of the hottest prospects in the country. After an up-and-down start to his college career, he exploded in 2020, throwing for 3,700 yards, 33 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions, showcasing elite arm talent and off-script playmaking that drew Patrick Mahomes comparisons. The Jets made him the second overall pick in 2021, ahead of names like Jamar Chase, Penei Sewell, and Micah Parsons. In their defense, most other QB-needy teams would have done the same in their position. Wilson even had his share of supporters that preferred him to Trevor Lawrence. The bad news is that he was bad at virtually every aspect of playing QB. In New York, he threw more interceptions than touchdowns and hasn't started a game since 2023. Cincinnati, no one. Colorado, Travis Hunter. I'm kidding. I love Travis Hunter. Colorado, Bo Matthews. An efficient but not overly dominant back at Colorado, Bo Matthews was never a high-volume rusher, and in his final college season, he only ran for 488 yards. Hardly the resume you'd expect from a future top pick. Yet the Chargers apparently saw enough to take him second overall in 1974. In the NFL, he averaged 3.5 yards per carry in his first 2 seasons, and over an 8-year career, he never once reached 500 yards from scrimmage. He stuck around the league as a fullback, spending most of his time in San Diego before playing with the Giants and Dolphins. Houston, Dave Klingler and Andre Ware. Both of these QBs put up video game numbers in one of the most explosive passing offenses college football has ever seen. Ware won the Heisman in 1989, throwing for 4,700 yards and 46 touchdowns. The Lions made him the 7th overall pick in 1990. He threw 5 touchdowns in his entire NFL career. Shortly thereafter came Klingler, who took the numbers even further. In 1990, he threw for over 5,100 yards and 54 touchdowns, making him one of the most prolific passers in college history. The Bengals took him 6th overall in 1992, and he finished his career with 16 touchdowns. Iowa State, George Amundsen. He was a QB running back hybrid at Iowa State, and his versatile skill set intrigued the Oilers enough to take a chance on that upside, selecting him in the first round of the 73 draft as a running back. But in 3 seasons, he ran for 194 yards and eventually left football to become a construction equipment salesman. Kansas, David Berser. The Bengals took the Kansas receiver 10th overall in 1981, but Berser didn't even crack 500 yards for his career and became a police officer. Kansas State, Josh Freeman. Josh Freeman looked like he was about to hit in a big way, and then everything just fell apart. At Kansas State, Freeman had the 6'6" frame, arm strength, and reasonable mobility that made him a classic high upside prospect. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers took the gamble at 17th overall in 2009. And in 2010, Freeman threw for 25 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions and led the Bucs to a 10-win season at 22 years old. Franchise QB stuff. But his accuracy regressed, decision-making got worse, and his mechanics tanked. Reports of poor preparation, substance abuse, withdrawals, and clashes with the coaching staff started to surface. In 2013, he was benched and released mid-season. After that, he bounced around the league and was effectively out of meaningful NFL action before turning 27. Oklahoma State, Justin Blackmon. Justin Blackmon was one of the greatest collegiate receivers of all time. He made a mockery of college football, winning the Biletnikoff Award for the best receiver in the nation not once but twice. The Jaguars understandably traded up from 7th to 5th overall in 2012 to pick him ahead of Luke Kuechly and Stephon Gilmore. Blackmon had a strong rookie season, finishing with 64 catches for 865 yards, but a series of suspensions limited him to only 4 very good games in 2013, and he never played in the NFL again after that. The difference with Blackmon is that he was actually good in the NFL when he was on the field. He would have been a superstar if not for the substance abuse. TCU, Jalen Reagor. Jokes aside, Jalen Reagor was one of the most explosive playmakers in the country at TCU. His speed, burst, and big playability made him a constant deep threat. There is a reason the Eagles took him 21st overall in 2020, one pick ahead of Justin Jefferson. But from the start, drops and an inability to separate consistently limited his impact. Over 2 seasons in Philly, he had 64 catches for 700 yards and 3 touchdowns before bouncing around the league as a return man. Texas Tech, Gabe Rivera. Known as Senor Sack, Rivera finished his Texas Tech career as one of the best defenders in the country. The Steelers drafted him 21st overall in 1983, passing on hometown kid Dan Marino in what was an attempt to build the Steel Curtain 2.0. Early on, Rivera played in a way that justified the pick, but 6 games into his rookie season, he was involved in a serious drunk driving car accident that left him paralyzed, ending his NFL career. UCF, Blake Bortles. Bortles rose from relative obscurity at UCF to one of the fastest rising prospects in the country. After leading UCF to a Fiesta Bowl win and throwing for 3,600 yards and 25 touchdowns in 2013, he began receiving Ben Roethlisberger comparisons. The Jaguars took him 3rd overall in 2014 to lead their rebuild, and Bortles put up big numbers at times, including a 35-touchdown season in 2015, but those touchdowns often came with high turnover totals and play that didn't pass the eye test. Despite the garbage time production, he never convinced anyone that he was a long-term answer. His most notable success came in 2017 when he helped lead Jacksonville to the AFC Championship. But in 2018, he was one of the worst QBs in the NFL, and the Jaguars moved on after 5 seasons. He served as a backup with the Rams before washing out of the league. West Virginia, Kevin White. Kevin White exploded onto the scene in 2014, putting together one of the most prolific receiving seasons in the country with 109 catches for 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns. With elite size, speed, and physicality, he became the number 2 receiver in his draft class behind only Amari Cooper. The Bears took him 7th overall in 2015, 2 picks ahead of Todd Gurley. But White suffered a fractured shin before his rookie season even began, forcing him to miss the entire year. Injuries kept him to just 4 games over his first 2 seasons, and by the time he finally saw extended action, he probably just was not the same player athletically. He ended his career with 397 receiving yards. Alabama, Trent Richardson. When he was running wild for the Crimson Tide, Richardson was set to be the next great NFL back. He was powerful, explosive, and coming off a 2011 season where he logged 1,700 yards, 21 TDs, and finished 3rd in Heisman voting. The Browns made him the number 3 overall pick in 2012, with hopes he would carry the offense a la Adrian Peterson, the player he was constantly compared to. Richardson rushed for 950 yards and 11 touchdowns as a rookie, but even then, efficiency was a major concern, and it quickly became a major problem. 2 games into his sophomore season, the Browns shockingly traded him to the Colts for a first-round pick, and it only got worse from there. Richardson struggled badly in Indy, averaging 3 yards per carry and losing his job. After 2014, he was out of the NFL. Arkansas, Steve Little. Steve Little is one of the most tragic what-could-have-been stories you'll find. In college, he was a weapon, a kicker with a massive leg who could flip games. He became one of the most decorated specialists in school history. The Cardinals took him in the first round of the 1978 draft, which is of course insane for a kicker, but that's how highly he was thought of at the time. Unfortunately, in the NFL, he was worse than imaginable. Over less than 3 seasons, he only made 48% of his field goals, leading to his release in 1980. Just hours later, Little was involved in a car accident that left him paralyzed from the neck down. Auburn, Bo Jackson and Andre Bruce. This one feels wrong to even say out loud, but hear me out. You almost have to include Bo Jackson because of how his NFL career ultimately played out. At Auburn, Bo was a Heisman Trophy winning running back and entered the '86 draft as perhaps the greatest draft prospect of all time. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the 1st overall pick, and he openly vowed never to play for them. So when they picked him anyway, Bo chose baseball. He was a completely wasted 1st overall pick for the Bucs and joined the Raiders a year later, where he became one of the most electrifying runners the NFL has ever seen. But if you want a more conventional bust, Andre Bruce is the Auburn name that always comes up. Coming out right after Bo in 1988, The Falcons took the pass rusher first overall in a draft that had 4 Hall of Famers go in the first 19 picks. Over an 11-year NFL career, he was fine, but for a number 1 overall pick, fine is a failure. He finished his career with just 32 sacks and never developed into the dominant edge Atlanta thought they were getting. Florida, Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier is a legend, just not as an NFL player. At the University of Florida, he was the man. He won the Heisman Trophy in 1966, became the face of the program, and helped put Florida football on the map. Smart, accurate, and ahead of his time as a passer, he was set to transition smoothly into the pros. So the 49ers took him 3rd overall in the 67 draft. But Spurrier bounced around the league for nearly a decade, mostly as a backup, failing to crack even 7,000 passing yards in his career. Eventually, he returned to the college ranks and became one of the most influential coaches in the sport, winning a national championship at Florida and revolutionizing offense with the fun and gun. So while his NFL career didn't live up to the hype, his football legacy as a whole is still legendary. Georgia, Tim Worley. A powerful slashing runner with legit breakaway speed, Worley had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in the SEC. The Steelers took him 7th overall in 1989 and handed him the keys to the backfield. He rushed for over 700 yards as a rookie, but 15 fumbles in his first 2 seasons canceled out anything positive he did. And off the field, Worley struggled with substance abuse, leading to a suspension that kept him out for the entire 92 season. He was traded to the Bears in 1993 for a 5th-round pick, but by that point his career was all but over. Kentucky, Tim Couch. Couch put up huge numbers in the air raid offense at Kentucky, throwing for over 4,000 yards, 36 touchdowns, and turning the Wildcats into one of the most exciting offenses in the country. He also had a prototypical 6'4" build, and that's why the Browns made him the number 1 overall pick in 1999 ahead of Donovan McNabb, tasked with leading the franchise in its return to the NFL. But Couch was thrown to the wolves behind one of the worst O-lines ever. He was sacked 166 times in 59 career starts. Any chance he had to develop was basically destroyed. To his credit, he was tough, even leading the Browns to the playoffs in 2002, but by his mid-20s, Couch was broken down, out of the league, and labeled a bust. LSU, Jamarcus Russell, Tyson Jackson, and Glenn Dorsey. Everyone knows the headliner here. Jamarcus Russell is the most infamous bust in NFL history. Number 1 overall pick ahead of Calvin Johnson, generational arm talent, and a career that blew up immediately in Oakland. I don't even need to explain it. But right behind him, you've got Tyson Jackson and Glenn Dorsey, 2 defenders who were each taken top 5 in the 2008 and 2009 drafts. At LSU, they were absolute wrecking balls. Dorsey in particular was a monster and won the Nagurski Award. Jackson lasted 8 years in the league but finished with just 9 career sacks, while Dorsey finished with 7 career sacks. Mississippi State, Michael Haddix. Coming out of Mississippi State, Haddix was a highly productive back with great size and pass-catching ability, which made him an appealing modern-style back for the time. The Eagles took him 8th overall in 1983 as a do-it-all offensive centerpiece, but Haddix was not a good NFL runner. He never had anywhere near a 1,000-yard rushing season. Yet he had a long career as a 3rd down back and receiver, finishing with over 1,000 career rushing yards and receiving yards. Missouri, Blaine Gabbert. Big arm, prototypical size, athletic enough to move, Gabbert checked every box physically, eventually going 10th overall to the Jags in 2011 right in front of J.J. Watt and then Christian Ponder. Gabbert was thrown into a rough situation early, starting as a rookie on a bad team with a shaky O-line and bad weapons. He developed a reputation for seeing ghosts, feeling pressure that wasn't there, bailing out of clean pockets, and struggling to process defenses. The physical tools were obvious, but the lack of confidence and decision-making were crippling. In 3 seasons in Jacksonville, he threw more picks than touchdowns before a decade-long career as a backup. Oklahoma, Brian Bosworth. The Boz was a full-blown phenomenon. A 2-time Butkus Award winner at Oklahoma, he played with an edge and swagger that made him larger than life. Mohawk, trash talk interviews, he had the look of a rock star or a movie star more than a linebacker. The Seahawks took him in the 1987 supplemental draft and made him the richest rookie ever. But Bosworth failed to adjust to the NFL. He was solid at times, but nowhere near the generational force he was built to be. And his most famous moment was getting run over by Bo Jackson on Monday Night Football. A shoulder injury cut his career short after just 3 seasons, and one of the most hyped up prospects ever was gone to pursue a career in acting. Ole Miss, Laquan Treadwell. Somehow, this guy is still in the NFL. At Ole Miss, Treadwell tore up the SEC his junior year and made contested catches look routine, so the Vikings took him 23rd overall in 2016. But he was never able to separate in the pros. Treadwell could win physically in college, but that wasn't going to fly against NFL corners. In 4 seasons with Minnesota, he never topped 302 receiving yards in a single year and scored 2 touchdowns. To his credit, he's still hanging around with the Colts despite not having caught a pass in 3 years, but undoubtedly a complete bust. South Carolina, Troy Williamson. This is one of the clearest examples of speed getting overdrafted. Coming out of South Carolina, Williamson had elite straight line speed, legit track speed that made scouts fall in love. He was seen as the next great deep threat, and after the Vikings traded Randy Moss in 2005, they used the 7th overall pick on Williamson to essentially replace him, taken ahead of DeMarcus Ware and Aaron Rodgers. That did not go as planned. The biggest of many problems was that he struggled badly with drops, especially on deep balls, wasting big play after big play. He worked at it, even trying vision training to improve his tracking, but to no avail. After 3 seasons in Minnesota, he was traded away and faded out of the league. Tennessee, Heath Shuler. Coming out of Tennessee, Shuler had everything you'd want in a franchise QB. Size, arm strength, mobility, and big-time production in the SEC. So the Redskins believed they had their guy, taking him 3rd overall in '94. But in the pros, Shuler was a fish out of water and never looked comfortable with the NFL game. To make matters worse, Washington had also drafted Gus Frerotte later in the same draft, and it didn't take long for a controversy to begin. A quarterback controversy Shuler lost. Within a few seasons, he was benched, replaced, and out of town. At the end of his 4-year career, Shuler had thrown 33 picks to 15 touchdowns and is one of the biggest quarterback busts of all time. Texas, Vince Young. One of the best college football players ever, hands down. The '05 national championship performance alone cemented him as a legend, lighting up USC in one of the greatest college football games ever played. Size, speed, playmaking, he was unstoppable in Austin. The Titans took him 3rd overall in 2006, expecting that same magic to translate. And early on, it kind of did. Young won Offensive Rookie of the Year, made 2 questionable Pro Bowls, and had a Tebow-esque knack for winning games even if the stats were not good. He had that intangible ability to do just enough to get the job done. But incompetence as a passer, work ethic issues, injuries, and a rocky relationship with head coach Jeff Fisher all started to stack up. And over time, the magic moments became fewer and farther between. By his late 20s, he was out of the league with 9,000 career yards and a 74 passer rating. Texas A&M, Johnny Manziel. Johnny Football broke the sport at Texas A&M. With his improv and backyard style, he became the first freshman ever to win the Heisman Trophy and was the biggest superstar in the country. He was also an extremely polarizing prospect, with anywhere from a 1st round to 7th round grade depending on who you asked. But of course, the Browns weren't fazed and took him 22nd overall in 2014. But in the NFL, Manziel's freelancing just looked more like bad habits, and the athletic edge he had over everyone in college no longer existed. Not to mention, off the field, his lack of preparation, discipline, and lifestyle became a bigger story than anything he did on the field. He started 8 games in his career and was out of the league after 2 seasons. Vanderbilt, nobody. North Dakota State, Trey Lance. Trey Lance might be the ultimate modern projection pick. At North Dakota State, he was incredibly efficient, most notably throwing 28 touchdowns to 0 picks in 2019, while leading the Bison to a national title. Big arm, elite athleticism, great size. His glaring flaw was that he only had 1 full season of college experience. That didn't stop the 49ers, who traded up to take Lance 3rd overall in 2021 to overtake Jimmy Garoppolo. But once he got a shot in 2022, a broken ankle in Week 2 flushed it down the drain. Later that year, Brock Purdy emerged and made Lance expendable. The 49ers traded him to the Cowboys to back up Dak, and he now backs up Justin Herbert in LA. Washington State, Ryan Leaf. Jamarcus Russell's greatest competition. Coming out of Washington State, the debate between him and Peyton Manning for the number 1 overall pick was real, and Leaf was the superior physical talent without a doubt. So the Chargers took him second overall after Peyton. But on the field, Leaf was completely overwhelmed, throwing 2 touchdowns to 15 interceptions as a rookie. Maturity issues, clashes with coaches and media, and a complete lack of composure under pressure turned him into a distraction as much as a disappointment. The infamous locker room meltdown with reporters sums it up nicely. He lasted 3 seasons in the NFL. Fresno State, David Carr. David Carr is one of the most debated bust cases ever, because his story feels a lot like Tim Couch's. At Fresno State, Carr was electric. Great touch, poise in the pocket. That's why the Texans made him the #1 overall pick in 2002, the face of a brand new expansion franchise. But he was walking into a hurricane. Carr was sacked a staggering 76 times as a rookie, still an NFL record. He was sacked 249 times in 5 seasons with Houston. The offensive line was historically bad, the supporting cast was weak, and he was constantly under siege. Not only did it affect his production, it completely altered how he played the game. Carr developed happy feet, rushing throws, and struggling to trust what he was seeing, even when the protection did miraculously hold up. He stuck around the league for years as a backup and even won a Super Bowl with the Giants, but he never had a fair shake to succeed with the situation he was drafted into. Notre Dame, Rick Mirer. Mirer put up big numbers at Notre Dame, showed strong decision-making, and carried himself like a pro. That's why the Seahawks took him second overall in 1993, and he delivered a solid rookie season, finishing second in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting. But instead of building on that first year like most rookies do, Mirer declined. After 4 seasons, it was clear he was not the answer, and Seattle moved on. He hung around the league as a backup through 2003. Colorado State, Kelly Stouffer. Kelly Stouffer is one of those lesser-known first-round QB misses. At Colorado State, he had the tools and high-level play that made scouts believe he could develop into a very good NFL QB. The Cardinals took him 6th overall in 1987, 1 pick after Duke bust Mike Junkin. Stouffer actually held out his entire rookie season due to a contract dispute, delaying his development right out of the gate. By the time he finally saw the field, he was already behind and never caught up. In 16 career starts with the Seahawks, he threw 7 touchdowns to 19 picks. Memphis, Paxton Lynch. The 6'7" QB led Memphis to one of the best seasons in program history and climbed all the way into the first round of the 2016 draft, where the Broncos traded up to take him 26th overall. But in only 4 career starts, he showed he was one of the worst QBs in the NFL. Despite being a first-round pick on a team desperate for their next franchise guy after Peyton Manning, Lynch was beaten out by Trevor Siemian. He never took a snap after 2017. Oregon State, Terry Baker. At one point, he was the best player in college football and one of the best players in college basketball. At Oregon State, Baker won the Heisman in '62, but also led them to the Final Four in basketball in 1963. The Rams took him 1st overall in the 1963 draft, but as a rookie, they learned his arm was only strong enough to throw lobs and not straight passes. In college, he was used purely to roll out to pass. He was converted to running back in 1964 and was out of the league after 1965. Marshall, Byron Leftwich. At Marshall, Leftwich was a Heisman contender, tough as nails, and one of the most memorable competitors in college football history, highlighted by an iconic game where his lineman literally carried him down the field between plays. The Jags took him 7th overall in 2003, and early on, Leftwich displayed the arm talent and toughness. But a slow release, limited mobility, and inconsistency kept him from looking like he'd ever be anything more than a low-end starter. Eventually, David Garrard took his job, and from there, Leftwich carved out a long career as a backup and even won a Super Bowl with the Steelers. He has since become a respected coach. Hofstra, Giovanni Carmazzi. At Hofstra, Carmazzi was a small school standout with intriguing tools, and enough upside to convince teams that he could develop into a starting QB. Steve Mariucci and the 49ers certainly thought so when they took him 65th overall in the 2000 draft. And while Carmazzi is not really the best fit for this list, given that he wasn't a high first-round pick, it's his story that deserves a mention. Carmazzi was actually one of the quarterbacks drafted before Tom Brady, but never played a single regular season snap in the NFL. Carmazzi became a yoga practitioner and goat farmer in Northern California, living completely out of the spotlight. Tulane, J.P. Lossman. Before Josh Allen, the Bills had a 20-year run in QB purgatory. and JP Losman was a big part of that. At Tulane, he demonstrated modern dual threat ability, and he was tantalizing enough that the Bills traded back into the first round to take him 22nd overall in 2004. But in 5 seasons with the Bills, he threw 33 TDs to 34 picks, and with a 10-23 record as a starter, Buffalo moved on after 2008.